How are you, class? My name is Purity Morevi from the School of Education, Department of Education Management and Curriculum Studies. This semester I'm going to take you through the unit DEM1101, Foundations of Physical Education and Sport, Gymnastics and Soccer. Now today, we are going to look at the course outline for this unit. Now this unit is comprised of 3 sessions. We have the Foundations of Physical Education and Sports, and these foundations encompass the Psychology of Sports and Physical Education. We have History of Physical Education and Sports. We have Sociology of Physical Education and Sports. And then we have the Philosophy of Physical Education and Sports. Then we have 2 sports units, and this is the Gymnastics and Soccer. Now these 2 sports area, the Gymnastics and Soccer, they encompass 2 sections, that is the practical and the theory part. So to begin with, we are going to look at the course content for the Foundations of Physical Education and Sports. We have History and Development of Physical Education and Sports in the ancient communities or other ancient societies. Now when we talk about the ancient societies, we are looking at the countries like China, Greece, Rome, and Egypt. Now per se, when we talk about the physical education having been started in these countries, that does not mean these are the only countries that were participating in sport, but most of the sports that we have today, they claim to have been born, or rather they have originated from these countries. And that's why they're regarded to be some of the Oriental nations in the current world. Then we're also going to look at the history and development of ancient Olympic Games. Now, we'll look at the Olympic Games in details, that is for ancient days. Then we are also going to look at the modern Olympic Games. So we are going to look at the history of the modern Olympic Games and the way it has developed up to today where we are. Now, when you talk about the ancient Olympic Games, we are going to look at where this particular ancient Olympic Games started. Now, this particular game started in Greece, so we are going to look at the activities that were being participated in Greece, and then how it is spread to the rest of the world. Now, having done that, we're also going to look at the history and development of physical education and sports in Kenya. Now, in Kenya, we are going to look at 3 eras. We have the pre-colonial era, we have the colonial era, and then we have the post-colonial era. Now, we are going to look in details of some of the physical education activities and the sports that were being played in Kenya before the coming of the colonizers, that is before the coming of the Europeans in Kenya. We're also going to look at how this particular European came to introduce the sports and physical education in our schools. Then we're also going to look at the post-colonial era. Now, post-colonial era is the era that we are living in today. So we are going to look how this physical education and sports per se has developed up to where we are today after the European left our country. How have we taken it so far? We're also going to look at the All African Games. Now, when we talk about the All African Games, we are going to look at some of the games that are engaged during these particular games. And this we are referring to the games that are normally participated by the African countries. Now, then we're also going to look at the history and development of the Commonwealth Games. Further to that, we are going to look at the psychology of physical education and sports. Now, when it comes to the psychology of physical education and sports, we are going to look at the terms that are related to this particular area. We'll look at some of the terms like the meaning of psychology of sports and physical education. We are going to look at other terms like learning. We are further going to look at the domains and we talk about the domains that are used when it comes to learning of the physical education skills, we are going to look at the cognitive domain, the affective domain, and the psychomotor domain. Now, when we're looking at the cognitive domain, we are going to look at how the learning is normally done to be able to have the learners acquire cognitively. For instance, the acquisition of the games. How are learners able to be able to know the rules of the games and they can be able to cognitively have them in their minds? Affective domain, we are looking at things like the appreciation of these particular sports and the physical education activities. And then lastly, we look at the psychomotor domain. That's look at the physical participation of this particular domain and how they up towards the development of the body itself. Now, we're also going to look at the skills, and we are mainly going to look at two types of skills. We have the open skills and the closed skills. Now, we are going to look in details what are the open skills, and when we talk about the open skills, we are looking at the skills that are normally done in an environment that keep on changing. For instance, if a soccer player wants to shoot a goal, he can shoot this goal from any given point. If, for instance, he still wants to dribble the ball from one point to another, and he's dribbling to it towards a given direction and meets an opponent, he can change the direction. So that kind of the skill what we're calling the open skill. Crossed skill is the next we're going to look at, and this one encompasses the skills that are normally done in an enclosed environment that does not keep on changing. So that means the skills are normally done in an environment that is fixed. For instance, if I'm shooting a ball, a goal in basketball, and I'm trying to do a jump shot, I can't do it from any other point, but I can be able to do it towards the basket. If I'm doing set shot, there is a given position where I'm supposed to position myself to be able to have the set shot goes inside the goal. So that kind of a skill is what we call the closed. Then we are also going to look at the stages of learning a skill. Now, when you're learning skill in physical education, the learning encompasses 3 stages. The first stage, we have the cognitive stage. And during this particular stage is when the learners have no idea of the skill. That means the learner is being introduced to the skill for the first time, is being shown how to be able to do the skill. I give for instance, if I'm teaching a skill, maybe for instance in badminton or tennis, I first have to learn how to handle the racket. Now, handling a racket means that I must know the grip of the racket itself. So during the cognitive stage, therefore, I must ask myself questions like, for instance, how do I handle the racket? What grip do I use? Now, during that particular stage, there are so many errors that are normally occurring because the learner is doing it for the first time. But as time progresses by, these errors become fewer and fewer. Now, once we move from the cognitive stage, we go to the next stage, and this is what you call the associative stage. Now, during the associative stage, this is whereby the skill has been learned, a few errors are still occurring, but the skill is not yet perfected. So that means the errors are occurring, but the kind of errors that are occurring are almost the same ones. So for instance, if the learner during the cognitive stage was not able to learn how to handle the racket, for instance, well, that problem is going to keep on recurring during the associative stage. So once we are done with the associative stage, you go to the last stage of learning a skill, and that one we call it the autonomous stage. Now, as the word suggests, the word autonomous comes from the word automatic. Now, this means the skill has been learned, and it has become almost automatic now. You can be able to do it without any interruptions. So that means if, for instance, you are learning how to kick the ball, you don't have to pay attention to where the leg is because it has become automatic. If, for instance, you are doing dribbling in basketball or hardball, you don't have to pay attention to where am I going to, where is the ball. The distance between the ball and the arm, you're not very paying a lot of attention to that because the skill has become almost very automatic. That stage is what you normally refer to be the autonomous stage. On real life, We have so many other skills that we can learn, and when the moment you get to the autonomous stage, we don't pay a lot of attention to them. For instance, when you're a young child, when you're starting feeding yourself, you could feed yourself and spoon could go to the mouth, other times to the nose, to the eye. But at time like now, the moment you know how to feed yourself, once the food is kept, even if it is in darkness, you cannot be able to miss your mouth because that skill of feeding yourself has become almost automatic. That's similar thing that occurs when you're learning skill in sports. We're also going to look at the factors that affect the skill acquisition. Now, for a learner to be able to acquire the skill well, there are some factors that determines how fast the learner is going to acquire the skill, or how long is it going to take for the learner to be able to acquire the skill. One of the factors is the distribution of the practice. Now, question we ask ourselves here, how many sessions of training does the learner have to go to train that skill in a week, for instance? Is it 1 day per week, 2 days per week, 3 days per week? If it is, for instance, you're training a learner how to be able to dribble the ball, and is doing it once per week, it is going to take long for the learner to be able to acquire the skill. But class, if I am training a skill and I ask the learner to be able to train 5 times in a week, are these learners going to acquire the skill fast, or is going to take forever? Another factor is the speed and accuracy. Speed and accuracy here, they must go together. For instance, for a learner to be able to acquire the skill well, accuracy is key. You have to be very accurate. But if you compromise speed and go for accuracy, the skill is going to be learned, but it's going to take forever. But on the other hand, if you compromise accuracy and go for speed, then it means the skill is going to be learned, but this particular skill will not be learned well. It means that there are so many errors that the learner will have acquired. Another factor is whole and part learning. What we refer to be as whole and part learning, class? What is the difference between whole and part? Now, when it comes to learning of the skill, when you're learning whole, it means that you're teaching the skill as a whole. You're not breaking it into parts. For instance, if I'm teaching a jump shot in basketball, I can only teach that skill with her parts all together, and that's learning whole. But if I'm for instance, teaching a front crawl in swimming, I can't teach that particular skill within 1 day or within one lesson. It can take even 3 weeks when I'm teaching maybe even 3 lessons in a week. First, I'll break this particular skill into 3 stages. Learning how to do the leg action. So first, the learner is going to learn how to perform the leg action. That is going to aid the learner to be able to glide well in the pool. Once he has known how to glide with application of the leg action, then I will teach the arm action. When the arm action is good, then I go to teach the breathing. So I'll have combined 3 parts: the leg action, the arm action, and breathing. From there now, the teacher can be able to demonstrate the whole skill done with breathing, with leg action, and the arm action together. So that's what we call teaching by part. That means one skill is broken into parts and is taught. But by the end of the day, this skill has to be done wholly for the learner to be able to acquire. So that's the factor we are calling whole and part. Then we have understanding the task to be learned. The learner must have an idea of what is this particular task are we learning. Is it being learned for the first time, or it was done some times back, or it was introduced some other time and it's a continuation? So you must have an understanding of what has to be done so that you can be able to learn the skill faster. Another factor is the transfer of learning. And we come to the transfer of learning here, we are looking things like how can we be able to transfer what was learned in one particular, for instance, sport to the other. If I'm teaching chest pass in basketball, I can transfer that content and teach it in netball because the spread of for instance, the fingers over the ball is the same, whether I'm teaching basketball or netball. But for instance, if I'm teaching hockey, how to drive the ball using hockey, and I'm teaching how to be able to bat the ball in cricket, those are two different things. The hockey bat, the hockey stick, and the club, the ones that we use in the cricket or the bat, they are not the same. Therefore, you must be able to differentiate. We can't be able to transfer how we handle the club in cricket, we transfer it to hockey because those are two different skills. Then we have self-analysis. This is where the learner can be able to analyze themselves and be able to know whether they are doing it well or they are not doing it well. So the learners should be able to be given a chance to be able to analyze themselves. They can even do it without the teacher. This time they can be able to know when they are making wrong or when they are doing the right things. Then we also have the feedback. The leadership, what kind of leadership has the teacher made to the learner? If the teacher hurried up to teach, then it means that the skill is going to be learned very fast, and yet it's not going to be learned in the right way. Then we also have feedback, or what you call the knowledge of results. This is communication that we get once the skill has been learned. It's communicated to you whether you're doing the right thing or not. And lastly, we have the motivation. What kind of motivation is being offered to the learner? We are also going to look at the plateau and the causes. Plateau is that particular point where when you're learning a skill or you're performing any physical activity skill, you have got to the point where you cannot be able to do better, however much effort that you put. And also you're going to look at what could be the causes of that plateau. Then also we have the aggression in sports. Now, aggression in sports, it's different from the normal aggression that we know. So we are going to look at what is this aggression we are calling in sports. For instance, if I go to the field with my team, we have agreed that we must win this match. So we are aggressive. That's kind of aggressive is different from if we are gangling up to go and beat another team physically. Then we also have violence in sports. We are going to look at violence in sports because this is something that is very common in our sports today. Not only in Kenya, not in Africa, it's worldwide. We have seen a lot of violence in sports. Now, question is, what causes this violence in sports? And now, what are the remedies? What can we do to be able to abstain or rather to kill the violence in sports? And then we are going to look at the motivation in physical education in sports. Now, what are some of the things that motivate our players or our learners, even in the classroom situation, for them to be able to turn up for the classroom on time, be there at the right time, doing the right things? What are the motivating factors? Then we're also going to look at the anxiety and stress in sports. Now, the sports people, they are not different from any other ordinary people. They also undergo normal life. They have stress. So the question is, what are the causes of this stress? And what can we do to be able to, how can we do to manage the stress? For instance, if a marathoner has been training for maybe like 3 years to go for a very competitive event like maybe Olympic, and he goes and loses, he was trying to get the medal and he doesn't go get closer to the medal, does that marathoner go back home the way he went? Is he happy about what he has done? So that means there's some stress that they also go through. So the issue of having the psychologists, the sports psychologists, to be able to deal with them can be handled in the stress management in sports. From there, we are going to look at the sociology of physical education in sports. Now, we are first going to define the terminologies that are used in sociology. For instance, defining the one sociology, defining the one sociology of sports. Then we're also going to look at the role of sports, or rather role of physical education in sport in the school, in our schools. And in this case, we are going to look at the relationship between sports or physical education and the other subject. Is there any, do they meet somewhere? When you're having a physical education lesson, do you have some areas where you involve mathematics, you involve geography, for instance? Then we're also going to look at the role of physical education teacher in school and in the general society. If, for instance, I may ask class, what are some of the role of physical education teachers in the school? Anybody can tell me some of the roles of physical education teachers in the school? What about in the general society? Do physical education teachers pay any attention to the society? Are they of any help to the society at large? We are going to look at the role of sports competition. Now, we keep hearing every day there is a league. For instance, in Kenya, we have the league for every sport. There is a football league, or rather the Association Football League. We have the netball league. We have the Premier League for football and other games like hockey. So what is the role of this competition? Do they have some effects? Are these effects positive? Do you have some that are negative? No. So we are going to look further and get to know what are the positive effects of competition and what are the negative effects of the competition. Then we're going to look at the interscholastic sport. Now, when we talk about the interscholastic sport, we are referring to the inter-school competition, or rather, the competition between one school and the other. Then we also are going to look at the intercollegiate games. Now, these are competitions between the colleges or the institutions of higher learning, like universities. And lastly, we're going to look at the concerns of sport in sports today. What are some of the concerns of sport in our society today? Are there some things that we cannot be able to do without sports, or are there some things that we can be able to do them, or are there some things that sports can be able to help us to be able to improve in our society? What role does the sport play, and what are these concerns? For instance, what are the views that are normally laid against maybe the interscholastic sport? For instance, what are some of the views or the challenges that we encounter when you're organizing the interscholastic or intercollegiate sports? Then, once we are done with our sociology, our last part of foundations, we are going to look at the philosophy of physical education in sports. And we first define the terms that are related to philosophy of physical education. For instance, defining the one philosophy, looking at the definition of philosophy of sports, and at the same time, being able to look at the branches of philosophy. Now, we are going to look at 4 branches of philosophy and the applications in physical education. So we look at logic, being the study of correct reasoning. We are going to look at the axiology. Axiology is the study of values. That means it's going to address values like ethics and also aesthetics. Epistemology, the study of knowledge. Metaphysics, study of the reality of nature. What goes beyond nature? For instance, things like, is there God? How many of us have seen that God? Do this particular world, can you be able to define the scope of the world so that things are being covered in metaphysics? Now, once you're done the metaphysics, therefore, you look at the applications of physical education and sport in these branches. We are further going to look at the general philosophies. We look at the idealism, the realism, pragmatism, the existentialism, the naturalism, experimentalism. So those are the natural philosophies or general philosophy that you're going to look at, and generally look at the applications of physical education in these particular philosophies. How do they help as far as physical education is concerned? Then we are going to look at sub-disciplines in physical education. And in this case, we are going to look at the sub-disciplines, like, for instance, the sports medicine, the physiology of sports, or rather the sports physiology. We are going to look at things like the philosophy of sports, like what you're doing right now, things like the sociology of sports. You're going to look at things like the kinesiology and like. So those are the areas that are going to be covered in that. Then further, we're going to look at gymnastics. Now, this is a sport event, so another sport area, and this one is mostly done physically in the field. But in the classroom, we are going to look at the history of gymnastics, where did it come from, and how it has developed. Then we are going to look at the equipment, what are the equipment and facilities that are involved as far as gymnastics is concerned, the categories of gymnastics, themes in educational gymnastics, the body shapes, Now, when you talk about the body shapes, the shapes that are normally body form when you're performing any stunt in gymnastics, then we are going to look at the skills in gymnastics. These include the rolls, the balances, the tumblings, the sprints, the sequences, the safety precautions that are involved when you're taking part in gymnastics, and then all other for how to organize and officiate a gymnastic display. In this, you're also going to look at the role of the officials that are involved, as well as the officiating of the gymnastics display is concerned. And then lastly, we are going to look at the soccer. And still again, in soccer being a sport that still again is going to be done in the field, we are going to look at the history, equipment, and facilities. But practically, we are also going to look at the skills. That is the practical skills, like the kicking of the ball, to kick the ball out, to stop the ball, methods of stopping, methods of kicking, heading the ball, and then we're going to look at the rules, the tactics, and the formation, the strategies, and then the rules and officiate how to officiate the game, to officiate the soccer game. Now, further here, we're going to look at the different officials that we have in soccer, and then lastly, we are going to look at the safety precautions that are involved when taking part in soccer game. Now, that brings to us the head of our class today. Now, all these things that you have looked at is generally what you're going to cover this semester. So during our next lesson, we are going to look at the terminologies that are used in these particular areas that you have looked at. Thank you so much.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.